Shalom, this is Yair, Davidiy speaking from the land of Israel. Today we are about to speak about the Parshat HaShavua, or the episode of the week. In Hebrew, it's called Parshat HaShavua, the section of the Torah that is read in the synagogue. The Bible is called Tanakh in Hebrew. Tanakh stands for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. The first section of the Bible is the so-called Pentateuch, the first 5 books, which were written by Moses. They are called Torah. They're referred to as Torah, even though the word Torah also in Hebrew, Torah in general means law, teaching, and in a religious sense it means all religious teaching, all religious instruction and learning is called Torah. Someone says they're going to learn Torah. They mean they're going to learn anything connected with Judaism, Talmud, laws, Tanakh, Musa, moral exhortations, anything whatsoever is connected with Judaism is called in general Torah. It's a general word. You have to, according to the context, you know what it's being referred to. When a section of the Bible is referred to as Torah, it means the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Pentateuch in English, or the Chumash, which is another meaning 5, which is another name for it in Hebrew. So the Torah, the whole 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, are read by the Jews every week in the synagogue, and they were arranged in such a way that every year the whole of the first 5 books, the whole of the Torah is read out, divided up into sections. These sections are called parashah, or meaning section or episode. And so this is what we are going to discuss. Every week we'll take, if we can, God willing, take the section which is read out in the Torah and very briefly go through it, give an overview, and a few words of commentary from the accepted commentaries. But this is interesting. It's interesting. It's not as boring as you might imagine. It's quite, and it's an interesting way, and a useful way to instruct oneself in this very basic work, which is the foundation of Judaism, the foundation of religion, the foundation of religious instruction, when the Almighty first revealed himself to mankind through the Torah, through the Bible, through the first big books of the Bible. So this section is it concerns the book of Exodus, chapters 10, 11, 12, and most of chapter 13, that is 13 verses 1 to 16. And it involves Moses. Moses was from the tribe of Levi. Moses had been called by God to go and deliver the people of Israel from the Egyptians. The Egyptians were oppressing the people of Israel. The people of Israel were in Egypt. They were being subjected to servitude, to hard labor, harsh labor by the king of Egypt, who had exterminationary motivations. He wanted to wipe out or vastly diminish the existence of the Jewish people, of the Israelite nation. We sometimes say the Jewish people, but actually we're referring to the whole of the Israelite nation, which means all the 12 tribes of Israel. They were in danger of being exterminated, and as part of this exterminatory process, had been subjected to harsh labor, and now God had sent Moses to deliver them, and he had come to Pharaoh several times already and asked for Pharaoh to release the Israelite nations, to allow them to go and worship God Almighty in the wilderness, and he had refused, and so far plagues had come upon him, and each time he had continued to refuse, or in some stages, as we will see, had seemed to relented. But as soon as the plague had been dismissed or been passed over him, he had gone back. He had become quite reprobate and returned to his policy and returned to his attitude of incalcitrance, of not being amenable to release the Israelites. So altogether there will be 10 plagues so far, until we get to our portion. 7 plagues had already come upon the Egyptians, as we have read. Plague 1 was when water of the Nile River turned into blood, fish were dying and so on. The second plague was when the frogs came up over everything and in everywhere. Frogs were all over the place. It was some creature. When it says frogs, it could mean some creature similar to a frog. So too, the third plague was fleas, or some creature which had some similarity to fleas in one way or other. The fourth plague was mixed herds of wild animals that came in from the desert and invaded human habitations. The fifth plague was livestock, a plague which struck all the livestock, the cattle, the sheep, and everything else, and caused them to die. The sixth plague was boils, the boils breaking out on the skin. The seventh plague was hail and brimstone, that is hail and a fiery substance that came down from heaven, caused great damage and suffering to the Egyptian peoples. And all of these plagues had come upon the Egyptians, but somehow or other the Israelites in their habitation, even though the Israelites dwelt besides the Egyptians, or in some cases, or a portion of them also in their own area within Egypt, these plagues had not come upon the Israelites where they were. It's worth noting that the plagues were definitely miraculous. Different explanations that these plagues are similar to natural phenomena, which are known in ancient times to have visited Egypt at some time or other, and also within historical times, different parts of the world have had such things happen to them. And so the plagues did have this attribute, had both a natural and a supernatural attributes or characteristics to them. And it's worth learning. It's all learning. It's all instructive. Learning what there was, what might have been, and what is similar to. It all comes to teach us something. So they were the 7 plagues that have already come upon the Egyptians. Another 3 plagues are about to come upon them. These 3 plagues include locusts, plague of locusts, would eat up all the crops and all the foodstuffs and cover the face of the earth. Also there would be darkness over all habitations of the Egyptians for 3 days, and no one would be able to move. It would be so dark. And the 10th plague would be the firstborn death of the Egyptians, and also their foreign captives, and everyone from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the lowest of the low amongst the Egyptians, including even the firstborn of the animals. So that is, they are the plagues that this chapter comes to summarize, comes to conclude. And it begins with the plague of locusts. In Exodus 10, verse 1, it says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I might show these signs of mine before him, in order that I may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son what things I have done in Egypt, my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord." Moses and Aharon came to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me." So have here this expression, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews. The God Almighty is the creator of the universe. He is the God. There is nothing besides him. He is all powerful. He controls everything, created everything. Everything that exists came to being through him and is sustained by him. He can do what he likes. He creates everything, rules over everything. But for his own reasons, he chose to have himself called the God of the Hebrews, to be identified as the God of the Hebrews, the God of Israel. And he chose for his own divine purpose, for his own reasons, that he should be particularized in the Hebrew nation, amongst the Israelite peoples. The peoples of Israel, the tribes of Israel, were the ones who first came to know God. Through the Israelite nations, God has made himself known to the world. And he calls himself the God of the Hebrews. And this is worth noting, and this is the reality. This is what it is. Pharaoh was warned, and that if he did not let the people go, another plague would come upon him. And he refused. And so Moses and Aharon were sent away. Then the servants of Pharaoh remonstrated with him, and they convinced him to call Moses and Aharon back. And when they came back, Pharaoh asked them, who do they want to go out into the wilderness with? So Moses and Aharon said they would go out with their menfolk and with their children and with their wives and their livestock, but the whole people would all leave. Pharaoh says, no, the men alone go, the adult men in other words, and the others stay here. And the men, after when they have done what they have done, worship God in the wilderness, they can return. And this was unacceptable, so Pharaoh sent them away. He did not agree. And it says they were driven out from the presence of Pharaoh, Moses and Aharon. And then the plague of locusts came over Egypt. One plague. After that, in the midst of that plague, Pharaoh asked Moses and Aharon to remove the plague from Egypt, and they did so. But he still refused to let the Israelites go, so then another plague came over Egypt, and it was darkness, a very thick type of darkness, though it was so dark that it could be felt. Rimash Hoshek, a Hoshek that was almost palpable, it says. And the Egyptians could not move, they could not move, it was so dark. The Israelites in their habitations had light. So this is, and as the Bible tells us. So once again, Pharaoh called Moses after the darkness had finished. After the 3 days, he called Moses and he said, "Go, you can go. You can all go. Go with all of your people, but let your flocks and your herds stay here. And even though you can go with the children as well." But Moses said, "No. Not only will we go with our flocks and our herds, but you will give us from your stock, from your flocks and herds, to supplement what we need." So Pharaoh hardened his heart, he would not let them go, and he drove them out, as he had done previously. After that, the Lord told Moses he's about to bring another plague upon the Egyptians. He's going to kill all the firstborn of the Egyptians. And that God also told Moses to tell the people what is going to take place, and they should borrow from the Egyptians all the good stuff that they had, the articles of food and clothing and implements and so on. And we should remember this was in the ancient times, it was in primitive conditions, or conditions that are different from our own. And you didn't have factory-produced goods. You didn't have things which we take for granted. Cheap clothing, cheap and good clothing and so on. Everything was handmade, and a good cloak could take a very long time to produce. The raw materials had to be gotten together, then had to be woven into yarn, and the yarn had to be woven into a garment, and it was much more valuable. Such an article of clothing was much more valuable to them than it was to us, than it is maybe to us. And so this is what the Hebrews were borrowing from their neighbours, taking from their neighbours, the Egyptians. And they were warned that they would all die, all the firstborn of the Egyptians would die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the meal, that is the most lowest labourer who works in the grinding stone, even the firstborn of her will be destroyed. Also the firstborn of the beasts. That was in Exodus 11 verse 4. In Exodus 29 verse 29, we also hear that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. So you may ask, okay, fair enough. The Egyptians were culpable. They had oppressed the Israelites. That all can understand how, if the whole nation of the Egyptians, or the Muslim nations, had participated in the oppression, that they should all be punished. But what did the firstborn of the captive? What was his sin? What was his culpability? What was his offence? Why should his firstborn also be killed? So we have a Midrash Rabbah. Midrashim are collections of sayings of the sages. The sages collected different sayings, different rulings, beginning from biblical times. First sages, we have historical records of, appeared in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, with there were still prophets in Israel, and Malachi and other prophets were also present, and they were together with the sages, and then the prophecy was ceased, and though in the future will be renewed. And the sages continue the tradition of the prophets. And a good portion of what they said in their debates and discussions and observations and traditions were written down in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, and also in other works. So that those sayings or those opinions and so on that were not in the Talmud but still existed, often transcribed into the Midrash. And the Midrash, so there are several different books of Midrashim. Two of the most famous are Midrash Tanchuma and Midrash Rabbah. So in Midrash Rabbah we have a commentary on this, concerning this question about why were the foreign captives also stricken. It says, many miracles that Holy One Blessed did he for Israel. He killed the firstborn of Egypt, and the firstborn of Egypt were likened to the beasts, as it says in Ezekiel 23:30, that the flesh of donkeys is their flesh. The Egyptians were compared to donkeys, as it says in Ezekiel 23:20, for she lusted after their paramours, whose flesh is as the flesh of donkeys, and whose issue is like the issue of horses. And then the firstborn of the captives, it could be, why were they killed? Because according to the Midrash, if it had been said to the foreign captive who was in the prison, are you prepared that Israel should go out and be redeemed? And the captive would reply, if it means that the Israelites will also be redeemed, I don't want to go out. I'm prepared to remain behind in captivity. So that was what was said. It also says that the good people among the Egyptians came and they made Passover with Israel and went up out of Egypt with them, as it says in Exodus 12:38. A mixed multitude also went up with them. All those Egyptians who wished that Israel should be saved were saved. They went to the houses of the Israelites when the angel passed over the houses of the Israelites, and they were not killed when the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed, but those who were against the Israelites were killed. And so too the captives who were against the Israelites, their firstborn was also killed. And you may ask, and the Midrash quotes biblical verses to substantiate this claim, this opinion. But you may ask, it seems somewhat incredible that anyone could have this attitude. But we see that such things did happen in history. Not so long ago as the Holocaust, there were people in Eastern Europe who were being killed by the Germans, being exterminated by the Germans, who were treated very cruelly, extremely cruelty, exploited and killed, and sadistically treated. But nevertheless, they were against the Jews, and they helped the Germans kill Jews, not all of them. There were those among them who helped the Germans kill Jews, because they were prepared to risk their own lives or to do work in detriment to their own people, just as long as the Jews would suffer. So we see this phenomenon does exist, and this is the same phenomenon that the Midrash tells us the slaves, foreign slaves amongst the Egyptians, had towards the Israelites, and that was why their firstborn was also stricken down. After that, we find in the verse, the commandment in Exodus 12:1, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be the beginning of months to you. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So they were commanded to make the month of Nisan, the Hebrew month of Nisan, the first month for ceremonial purposes, for things connected with the temple, for sacrificial offerings, for the vows, different things you needed. A month that would be considered the beginning of the year for those things, for those purposes. They would need a year that would begin on a day that was suitable to them. This year, and this month, this first month, is called the month of Nisan, in Hebrew Nisan, and it is the seventh month when you count from the beginning of the secular year in the Hebrew calendar, because the secular year in the Hebrew calendar begins from Tishri. After that, the account continues, tells us in Exodus 12, verses 29 onwards, that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, the servant and his son, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all the servants, all the Egyptians, a great cry in Egypt, for there's not a house where there's not someone dead. So we've solved the problem of why the foreign slave girl and the foreign slave man, their firstborn were killed. Why was that? We explained it. But now there's a question, fair enough, what do the animals, is their firstborn of the animals of the Egyptians also killed? What was their offence? Why were they stricken? So one of the explanations is that the Egyptians worshipped animals, and each and every animal was a kind of god to the Egyptians. So God, the Almighty in His wisdom, wanted to show the Egyptians that their gods were not powerful, had no power of their own against His commandments, against His decrees. That is what Rashi says. So that is one explanation. Another explanation is that the principle of striking down the firstborn of anything whatsoever belonging, attached to, or associated with Egyptians also included the foreign captives, and also it included the animals, and it would have included the Israelites as well, because the Israelites also had been until not long ago, yesterday, in effect, a couple of days ago, they had been the property of the Egyptians. They had been the servants of the Egyptians. They had been the slaves of the Egyptians. They had been subjected to the Egyptians. And they, according to this logical extrapolation, they too would have been among the victims. They too would have had their firstborn stricken down. But by taking the lamb, they were told to take a lamb and tie it to their bedposts and examine it for 4 days before killing it, just before what became the 14th of Nisan, the day of Passover, the first Passover. And they were doing this in the eyes of all of the Egyptians, and this lamb was a representative of the God of Egypt. In other words, they declared themselves independent of the Egyptians. They were now obeying God. God was their master. They had gone out already within Egypt. They had released themselves, freed themselves to become freed from Egyptian subjection. They were no longer part of the Egyptians, and therefore, they would not be subject to the visitations that came upon the Egyptians. And this was the reason for the lamb. This was also symbolized by them placing the blood of the lamb that they killed on the top of the door frame and on the sides of the door frame, as the Bible tells us that they did. This was the first Passover, and this was what happened. And the angel of God came over, and he jumped over. The word Passover is in Hebrew, it's actually Pesach, meaning jump over. Pesach it's called, and we call it, and the Passover is has the same meaning. And the angel of God, is wherever there was blood on the doorposts and on the head, on the top of the door frame, the angel passed over. He did not strike anyone in that house. And all of the Israelites, all of the Hebrews said, put this blood on their door frames and on the posts beside their doors, and so they had been saved. Whereas the Egyptians, all the firstborn of the Egyptians had been killed, died in this blow, including the firstborn son of Pharaoh himself. And so Pharaoh called to Moses and Aharon and told them to get out, move out as quickly as possible, and just leave. And they did, and they went out with their flocks and their herds. And the Egyptians also wanted them to leave, were giving them, it says, the Bible describes they were coming after them with clothing, with gifts and so on, and thrusting them all these goodies upon them to take them. Just leave, take what you want, take what we have, and leave, get out of here. Because they were afraid. They saw all these disasters that had come upon them, and they had not learned their lesson until now, and now they realised that this was their only hope of survival, was to get the Israelites out, and not to incur the wrath of God Almighty in doing so. So this is what they did. Children of Israel, they left. They went out, they had 600,000 men on foot besides children, so there's 600,000 males. We learn later 600,000 men means anyone between the ages of 20 and 60, 600,000 of them. And this number did not include the people from the tribe of Levi who were extra additional to this. It also did not include the women and the children, and did not include those who were less than 20 and those who were more than 60. So altogether, roughly in modern terms, maybe 3 or 4 million people went out, maybe more, maybe less, but it's a round figure. 3 or 4 million people of Israelites picked themselves up and went out of Egypt. And they also took unleavened cakes with them, cakes of flour mixed with water, kneaded, that had not had time to ferment. They took that with them as they'd been commanded to do so. And so, ever since then, they have the feast of Passover, and such bread, unleavened bread, is eaten. In this feast, it's known as matzot. You can buy it in the supermarket. It's a bit like a wafer. Not everyone likes it, but it's what it's done. Given the feast of Passover furthermore, and also told that a foreigner or hired servant shall not eat of it. But if a foreigner does want to eat of it, he shall have to become a member of the people of Israel, and in order to do that, he will have to be circumcised. That there shall be one law for the Israelites and one law for the foreigners who attach themselves to the Israelites. The same law should apply to him that is a native and to the stranger who sojourns among you, who lives among you. That is what it says in Exodus 12:48. Someone who attaches himself to the children of Israel, to the Jews in our time, and wishes to become part of the Jewish people, has to keep all of the laws the same as the Jews do, and he has all the rights and benefits that they have. In the same way as it's good, what is good for them, it should be good for him. And it says all the children of Israel did it, just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aharon. That same day the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. And also they were commanded to sanctify the firstborn, had to sanctify all of the firstborn of every of the womb. Every firstborn child had to be sanctified, and you also had to go through a ceremony of being redeemed. They take it up to the Kohen. The Kohens are the priests. They are descendants of Aharon, the brother of Moses. They're from the tribe of Levi. Moses and Aharon were also from the tribe of Levi, so I have Kohens amongst Israelite people. Kohen is a common name. Most people with the name Kohen belong to this group of priests, descendants of this group of priests, and a piece of silver worth about, I don't know, in my time it was worth $20, maybe now it's $40, $50. And it's quite a sum of money. It's not cheap. And this is, you buy this piece of silver and give it back to, and you give it over to the Kohen, and he says a blessing, and he redeems the firstborn. So this is what is done. And then they were told they were going to go out and come into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, so peoples of Canaan. Here there are 5 nations are mentioned. In other places 7 nations are mentioned, or 10 nations are mentioned, or 12 nations are mentioned. Altogether there were 12 different sections of the Canaanites, but there was distinctions made between them. Out of this 12, it seems that 2 of the tribes of Canaanites left at an early stage, and then 10 were left in the whole of the promised land. The whole of the promised land of the Israelites was stretched from the Nile to the Euphrates, and stretched right up into northern Turkey, and right over to the east into almost up to the Persian Gulf, or up to the Persian Gulf. And there's quite an area. The Israelites never conquered all of it, but they may have conquered all of it and had some control over it. They never settled in all of it. And at the beginning they were commanded to go and especially concentrate on that section of the land of Canaan, to the west of the Jordan River, with a portion to the east of it. And in this section there were these 5 nations: the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And one of the nations is called Canaan. It's called Canaanites. And so it's a particular name for one of the Canaanite tribes, and it's also a name for all of the Canaanites together. It's as if amongst the Germans, amongst the German tribes, maybe you had a small tribe amongst the Germanic tribes, was called Germany, called Germans. It didn't have a name of its own. So that's the same thing with the Canaanites. You had different tribes of Canaanites, and one of the sections of the Canaanites was also called Canaanite. It didn't have a name of its own. It did not have it was both a particular name and a generic name. And this is what happened, and this is what there was, and at all events they had to redeem the firstborn of their womb by giving a piece of silver to the Kohen in the ceremony. And also another thing what they had to do, when a donkey was born, they had to replace the donkey with a lamb. They had, in other words, the donkey, a firstborn of the donkey, belonged to the Kohen. If they didn't want to give the donkey over, instead of the donkey, they had to give a lamb, and this was taken in place to redeem the donkey, as if to say. If they didn't do that, then the donkey had to have his neck broken. In other words, it would be economically penalised for not doing that. And nowadays, so that's a point of interest. Until recently, people did everything with beasts of burden, with donkeys, with horses, with cattle, with all kinds of animals to help. Sledges in Canada and in Alaska used to be pulled by dogs and what have you. Animals used to work for humans. And the donkey was a very common work animal. It's probably the most common, the most popular, best known work animal. The donkey is relatively intelligent despite the adverse, the negative, pejorative image he has. Donkeys are relatively speaking intelligent. Donkeys are also hardy, they are resilient, they don't get sick, they don't need as much care and looking after as a horse does. They're much tougher, they don't get diseased, and they need less food, and their food can be of a much coarser quality than that given to horses. So a donkey has an advantage. The first donkeys were the main beast of burden all over the place, everywhere. But nowadays, if you have a donkey, you can't get rid of him. You can't do anything with him. Maybe if he's strong, even if he's a small donkey, you can't even ride him. But if he's real large enough, you can ride around the neighbourhood, maybe on the donkey, on the fields. And I myself know, I used to live on a farm, and I had a donkey. And I didn't do much with him. I fed him and said hello to him and so on. He was there. Then I had to move. I had to move on. I had to move from the place, and I couldn't take my donkey with him. So I tried to get rid of him. I had to get rid of him. And I had difficulty in giving him away. In the end, someone did buy it from me, maybe to do me a favour, I don't know what. And the Arabs stole it from the person who bought it from me. So it must have been worth something somewhere. But at all events, it wasn't an easy thing, it wasn't an easy task. Usually, on the whole, in principle, if you have a donkey, you can't even give him away. And because you have to, if someone takes him, they have to look after him, they have to feed him. And it's a whole hassle, and there's nothing you get back for it. Because if you want to carry things around, you just call a taxi or a van, and you put things on that, or you ask one of your neighbours to help you. But this is what they did in those days. In those days, donkeys were valuable, and we have the prophet Zechariah predicting that this situation would exist in the end times just before the time of the Messiah. In Zechariah chapter 8, he is speaking of the time leading up to the coming of the Messiah, just before the coming of the Messiah. And he says, before those days, no wages for a man, nor any hire for an animal, and so on. So this is one of the signs, and the Sages pointed this out in the Sanhedrin, in the Masechet Sanhedrin, the Tractate of Sanhedrin, in the Talmud, that this would be one of the signs just before the Messiah comes, that the donkey will not be worth anything, will not be able to hire it out, no one would want it. And this has come about in our times. We have automation, we have mechanization, and we have automation, and we have who knows what, and computers and everything else. We don't need donkeys anymore. A donkey cannot be hired out, and this was one of the signs that Zechariah said would prevail in times leading up to the coming of the Messiah. See it in Zechariah 8, verse 10. There were no wages for a man, nor any hire for an animal. And this is what is transpiring before our eyes in our time, and this is the first time in history. So this could well be a sign that the days of the Messiah are drawing close. Doesn't mean that they're going to come about tomorrow, but they might. But we're getting close. That is something worth noting. And getting back to what we're talking about in Exodus 12, verse 14, it says, it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? That you say to him, with a strong hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. When Pharaoh suddenly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I sacrificed to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb. But all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlets on your forehead. Literally it says between your eyes, so some people claim it meant up here, but actually we know that it meant here, which is also between the eyes on your forehead. And this is what the Israelites did, and the Jews still do it. They put these tefillin on their hair, on their arm, and on their head, on their up here on their forehead, and these tefillin, these phylacteries, it's translated as being actually wooden, not actually leather boxes painted black, made out of hard leather. And they have the ones on the head have compartments in them. The other one is on the hand is entirely empty. And within these compartments or within these boxes are in certain parchment scrolls with specific verses inscribed upon them. These verses you can find them Exodus 31 to 10, Exodus 13 1 to 10, Exodus 13 11 to 16, Deuteronomy 6 4 to 9, and Deuteronomy 11 13 to 21. These are with the specific verses that are inscribed and that the Jews now put in the tefillin and put them on their arm and on their forehead. It also says that they shall frontlets on your forehead. Word translated as frontlets in Hebrew is totafot, or totafoth, or totaphos, depends how you different forms of pronouncing the Hebrew. And we understand it, the totafot to be derived from a root, tof. It's a combination of Hebrew root words, but the basic root is tof, and tof actually is similar to the same, related to the word for drum. And what's a drum? Well, in those days a drum was a hard box or a containment, often made out of stiff leather, with thinner leather over the top of it, and they used to drum on it, as the Arabs still do, as people do in the Middle East today. And it connotes something usually made out of leather that was hollow, a hollow compartment. And this is what the totafot are. And it says you should put these words on your arms and between your eyes, and they shall be for totafot. And this is what we have, and this is what they are, and this describes it. As the sages taught us. And we find even from in the Second Temple period, archaeologists find such tefillin in different parts of Judea in ancient times, and the tefillin that they find are very similar to the ones used today, or in fact, in practical terms, identical. In practical terms, identical. One more point worth noting is that in this section it says, shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this that you shall say to him? With a strong hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. And this is a central theme that we find throughout this section, throughout this parasha, that we are commanded to teach our children of these matters, of how we came out of Egypt, how God Almighty chose the Israelites from out of all the nations of the earth to make himself their God, to be personally their God, the God they will have for themselves. The God of the universe, the Almighty, made himself the God of Israel. And this is repeated, this message is repeated 4 times, that we should tell this message to our children. We find this in Exodus 10, verse 2. And that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's sons, that is your grandchildren, what things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. Also, in Exodus 12:26 it says, when your children shall say to you, what does this service mean to you? That you shall say, this is the service of the Lord's Passover, passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our households. Exodus 13 says, you shall declare to your son on that day, this is done because of that which the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. And again in Exodus 13, verses 14 onwards, it shall be, when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, with a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. As we explained, it shall be as a sign on your hand, as frontlets on your forehead, for with a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. So this is a message. This is a message of the parasha of this episode. God Almighty saved the Israelites, took the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt, and did signs and wonders to them. And he brought plagues on the Egyptians, and he struck them. He struck the Egyptians because the Egyptians were oppressing the Israelites, and he wished to show both to the Egyptians and to all of creation that he is God, and he is involved in the universe. He is involved in the affairs of mankind, and he manifests himself through the people of Israel. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.